Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. Today I'm joined by Scott Wilson. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm all right, Matty. Thank you.
Yeah. Before we get stuck in, I'll just quickly announce the competition winner that we've had over on our YouTube channel. If you have won, I do a drum roll, but I'm not very good at drum rolls. So
I've got a pen. I can hit the table like this.
Congratulations, John Nichols. You have won the shirt giveaway that we've done over on there. So the email, if you want to get in touch with us via email, is in the description of our YouTube below. Another quick bit of housekeeping before we get stuck into things from last night. We Are Sunderland. You can subscribe for £1 for 6 months worth of coverage. If you do so, you could be in with a chance of winning hospitality tickets for the final day of the season against Sheffield Wednesday. That competition closes tomorrow. So you've got today and tomorrow. If you haven't yet subscribed and put your name in the hat, you could win that grand prize. Scott, Ellen Road last night. It was a raucous atmosphere, but Sunderland certainly put the cat amongst the pigeons, didn't they?
They did. It was good, wasn't it? I think before we get on to Sunderland, I just enjoyed. I thought for a 0-0, it was a really good game. There was loads going on all the way through it. Ellen Road's good, isn't it? It's got a bit of character. It's got a bit of atmosphere. Their fans were obviously massively up for it because of where they're at in the table and everything. I thought the away fans, as ever, were superb in their kind of section down by the side of the pitch. So yeah, so that's the first thing I thought. I thought for all that, to a large extent with Sunderland, all of these games between now and the end of the season mean little really. Thought it was a really good, enjoyable game of football. Yeah. Sunderland were excellent, weren't they? I mean, tactically, Mike Dodds has got it absolutely spot on for the second game in a row against Leeds. I think, there's been questions raised about him over a number of different things in the last, couple of months, but I think you've got to say last night, you got it absolutely right. Going 5 at the back worked. I thought all 3 centre-halves played really well in different ways. Yeah. Luke O'Nien did what Luke O'Nien does, was the leader, threw himself into blocks, thundered into tackles, which is what you expect from him. Thought Dan Ballard was probably just about man of the match. I feared for him a little bit when he picked up that relatively early booking, but he just trod the line perfectly after that between being aggressive, being on the front foot, but not getting himself into a situation where he could have got sent off. And then Try Hume as well, who I think, we've seen before can play at centre-half if needed and did it really well. I'm sure we'll get on to Pembele in a minute. I'm sure we'll get on to Dan Neil and Jack Clark. But I thought right across the team, Sunderland looked like a group of players who knew exactly what they were being sent out to do, had a job, did it, came away with a point. Now, yes, Mike Dodds said after the game, we were both in his presser, didn't he? I don't want to be someone who's celebrating a draw. And I think the fans will want to hear that because, Sunderland should not be looking to get a draw against anyone in the Championship. That said, where Sunderland are at the minute, where Leeds are at the minute, the disparity in cost, wages, experience between the two squads, if you take all of that into account, then I think that's a good result and a good performance for Sunderland.
Yeah, it's certainly difficult to argue. I mean, as you say there, just heading into the game, you thought Ellen Road, Leeds are going for one of those automatic promotion spots in the title. You thought, could Sunderland fold here like they did against Blackburn? But as you say, I don't think I looked at one player there last night who didn't come away doing their job, and they looked solid. I think that's the first clean sheet an away side has had there since, I think it's back in September, I think. Yeah. And that's the first time Leeds have failed to score since December, I think. So that tells you just how good that performance was. Just a word for the travelling fans. I thought, as you say there, there's not a lot to play for them. Nearly 3,000 fans at Ellen Road. I've had that new Chris Riggs song stuck in my head all morning. But yeah, as well, just a word on Mike Dodds as well. I mean, Daniel Farke will be having nightmares about coming up against Mike Dodds because that's twice now where the tactical blueprint that he's put in has worked a treat. There were 1 or 2 occasions, I think, in the first half where Crescenzio Somerville just got in the pockets of space and you thought, well, they might be in here. But give them credit where credit's due, to have just one shot, on target at home for Leeds, that is a monumental feat. And we were talking about Sunderland not having a shot on target the other week at home. I mean, that just goes to show just how good that performance was defensively. Interestingly, I agree with everything you say on the back three. I thought Dan Ballard was immense. But on Timothy Pembele, I've watched a lot of him for the under-21s this year, and I'll hold my hands up. I thought that it might be a bit of a stretch to see him come in there. He hasn't sort of looked ready for the first team, but to give credit where credit's due, I thought he was great last night. I think right wing back is probably his position for what he gives you offensively. I thought the pace, there was a moment where in the second half, it was either Nonto or Somerville went racing through on goal, and Pembele's pace to catch up with him and stop the attack. I thought it was brilliant. He gave an outlet on that right-hand side. Trey Hume sort of had to deal with the runs of Somerville, and that left Pembele to sort of focus on Firpo, and I actually think that worked a treat for Sunderland. They were able to get in down that side a couple of times. I know Mike Dodds spoke about positionally, maybe they could have been a little bit higher in that first half. But I think to give credit where credit's due as well on the other side, I thought Callum Styles had a really good game. I thought Sunderland's wing-backs actually played really well.
Yeah, I think, Dodds said as much after the game, didn't he? He basically said, I think Pembele suits a 5. And at the moment where he's at in terms of his defensive development, I think that's probably right. He's definitely got aggression, athleticism. He can get up and down. He's comfortable in possession. All of that side of the game, I don't necessarily worry about with him. I think in a 4, then his positioning and his just kind of reading of the defensive game would get asked a lot more questions than it did last night in a 5. And as you rightly say, I think you've got to give, you've got to flag up the fact that Trey Hume was there inside him and was doubling up on Somerville and was definitely an aid to what Pembele was doing defensively. So I think at the moment, if it's a 5, then I think he's probably the best option Sunderland have for that right-hand side. If it's a 4, then I'd be, unless there's injuries, I'd be really surprised if we saw him playing right back in a 4 between now and the end of the season. That's not to say he can't go on and do it in the future as he develops, but I think you're right. Where he's at the moment, I think that would ask completely different questions to what he had to do defensively last night.
There's a strange sort of air of positivity, isn't it? It feels a really strange sort of feeling after the game, given, Mike Dodds is right to say, I think, as you mentioned there, look, he doesn't want to be celebrating draws, but it was a really good away performance. I think any time of the year you'd celebrate picking up a point at Ellen Road, but I think that just takes stock of where Sunderland are at. And I think the comments he sort of made in his pre-match press conference about not letting players get their flip-flops out or start thinking about holidays, I thought that was a real response to say, look, we're behind you. We're not going to let off. And I think they really needed that performance, just not to get fans back on side, but just to sort of like prove a mental point heading into the final few games. And I do think that performance can be a platform. We saw from Cardiff to Blackburn, though, how quickly it can sort of switch. But I do think that Leeds performance can be a platform now.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one because the problem is the Blackburn performance was so horrendous. And it kind of fed into the wider narrative of what's actually going on with Sunderland in the long term, with the manager, with the ownership, all of that. It just felt like that all came to a head on that day. Now, actually, either side of that game, they've kept 4 clean sheets in 5 matches. They're unbeaten in those 5 games. For those 4 of the 5 games. Their form is by no means horrendous. In fact, defensively, they're probably playing just about as well as they have all season. It's just that in the middle of all of this, we had that absolute horror show on a bank holiday Monday, which, like I say, just felt like it kind of summed up a lot of what's been going on in the wider context for Sunderland. So you cannot ignore that performance and the alarm bells that were ringing left, right, and centre all around that. You can't. But to be fair to Mike Dodds, as he said after the game last night, actually, either side of that game, he's got a lot of things right, and Sunderland have got a lot of things right. They're not as potent an attacking threat as they were when Tony Mowbray had them. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Even last night, it felt like they were massively reliant on Jack Clarke again. In terms of what they were doing in the final third, it was pretty much all going through Clarke. And you suspect that that's probably going to be the case in the games that remain between now and the end of the season.
Yeah.
But at the other end of the pitch, I do think that they're more defensively organised. And, Mike Dodds does seem to have a clearer plan about how he wants this side to defend and shut up shop than was probably the case under his predecessors. But with the caveat that the wheels did come off against Blackburn. You can't deny that.
Yeah, again, you can get sort of drawn into it too much, can't you, about trying to micro-analyse what went wrong. And we've had some comments through. Stephen Fells said everyone knew the job last night. Completely agree. Dodgy got it right. We've seen before, just in his previous games, how he set up against Leeds. I think I asked him at his press conference, does he read too much into, obviously, the Bristol City game, this West Brom game coming up, and the Leeds game? And he said, look, there's a lot changed since then. He felt like he inherited a Tony Mowbray side that there was very little wrong with it, in truth. There's change in personnel. We've had another comment through from Studden81. I think Callum Styles deserves credit for his performance last night. Defended really well. Yeah. Breaking up play and linked up well with Clark going forward. And I think that's a point worth mentioning. Obviously, the link-up play down that left-hand side. I've been a bit sceptical about Callum Styles, about what sort of position he fits in. I think he had a really good game last night. I thought, as Dodds said, when they pushed him up a little bit higher, he found those pockets of space and there was an outlet.
I'll just jump in there. I think there's parallels with Pembele, and I think at the moment Styles looks a better wing back than a full back.
Yeah,
he's really a midfielder, isn't he? He was playing in defence, and you kind of see that when he's at wing back because he can have that bit more freedom with the ball. He's clearly technically very good. He can pass it, he can move, he can receive the ball under pressure and not be uncomfortable with that. All of those sides of the game, I think he's absolutely fine with. I think again, a bit like Pembele, you would worry. I think with Stars, we've seen on occasion when he has played as an out left back in a 4, it's his positioning and his where he's pulled to and just his general reading of the game. And again last night, I think he benefited from having that centre half inside him that almost when he wasn't really left one-on-one with a winger, because he always had the comfort of knowing that there was a kind of third centre half just tucking in alongside him, and that undoubtedly helps. So I think for both of those, they look better suited to a 5. Now, it's been horses for courses in terms of the 2 Leeds games, hasn't it? It's worked because what playing with the 5 has done is it's cut off Leeds' threat down the flanks, which is a massive, massive part of their game. I think there's an argument that with the players they've got at the minute, maybe Sunderland are just better suited to a 5 full stop. And there might be an argument for sticking with it for the final 4 games of the season, regardless of what kind of teams they're coming up against. I suspect Dodds won't do that because I think he'll look at some of the games that are coming up and think, well, do you know what? We'll be better with a 4 for those games. But the blend has felt pretty good when they've played with a 5. I guess with the caveat that we haven't really seen how they would do playing with 5 at the back in a game where they had a lot more of the ball. Would they then struggle to actually get on the front foot and get at teams if they're playing with a 5? Maybe we'll find that out in the games that remain, depending on obviously what he decides to do with his selection and formation for those matches.
Yeah, certainly since Dodds has come back into sort of interim charge. I think he tried it at Swansea. I think it's fair to say that was a half that just capitulated. First half didn't work. Didn't work there. Leicester, that I think everyone's pretty well aware that was one of Sunderland's better performances. The only thing, as you say, has been them going forward, and they haven't. Yeah. But that's been a case all season, I think, without Jack Clark and getting the ball into the final third. I actually think, look, people will look at that, and again, a striker hasn't scored. It's at Ellen Road, but I actually think Job worked his socks off. He played a really, really important role last night in sitting on either Glenn Kamara or Ilya Gruev just to stop Leeds playing through the phases. And Ekwa and Neil behind him picked up the midfield runners. I think it's a real interesting talking point. That will they play it going forward, because when they've played against the sides, the so-called better sides in the league, those above them in the table, it's worked. It's limited the opposition to very little in terms of chances. But as you say, will it work going forward against the teams, so-called lesser teams?
Well,
Time
I
will
could see
tell.
it working at West Brom. I could
Yeah,
see, because West Brom will come on. In many ways, it'll be a very similar game to the one that we saw last night, where there'll be an expectation on West Brom to win it. They'll be the ones on the front foot. I could see Sunderland playing with a 5 at there, springing on the break, maybe having a little bit more opportunity on that break than they had last night. Maybe
yeah,
Robert comes in to give them a bit more of a twin threat with him and Clark. But I could see that working. I think you're right then. If you then come to Millwall at home, who are going to be the opposite and presumably are going to sit in and
yeah.
look to do to Sunderland what Sunderland in a way did to Leeds last night, that then becomes more difficult with a 5. I accept that. So, there might be a bit of mix and match to be done, but I definitely think there's an argument for sticking with it at the Hawthorns.
I certainly feel as well that the January recruitment probably tailored or was set up to Sunderland sort of playing a back 5, I think. I mean, you look at who came in. Styles, I think left wing back, it's fair to say, is his best position. Leo Hjelde, I probably think left of a 3 is a centre half. That's probably where you'd like to see him play. Although with the caveat, as I've said on previous podcasts, that the Swansea game when they played with him and Styles, it felt a little bit unbalanced. It felt like they both didn't sort of know what they were doing. But when Adji at least comes back in, as we saw again last night, Sunderland are very strong when they can play with that. And yes, okay, it wasn't the greatest free-flowing performance going forward, but they still had probably the best opportunities at Ellen Road last night.
Yeah. I mean, the couple that Jack Clark, like we say, largely made for himself in the first half on the break. Shots probably just a bit too close to Meslier, but were as good as anything Leeds creating.
Yeah.
Probably the best chance of the whole game is the one that Clark flashes across the face of the 6-yard box in the second half. Other than obviously the penalty, which maybe we'll get to, but or we'll cross over. But yeah, I mean, Sunderland did look all through the first half. You were thinking, do you know what? There's something in this for Sunderland. They weren't as threatening in the second half, but yeah, I still think against undoubtedly one of the best sides in the league, there was enough there from Sunderland in an attacking. It wasn't just a case of 11 men behind the ball, batten down the hatches as soon as it comes, kick it away, and just sit in. It wasn't that, and I don't think it ever will be in a Sunderland side that's got Jack Clark in it, that might have Patrick Roberts in it, that's got Job in it. They will always carry a threat, no matter how they're set up.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? I mean, moving forward in this, the next couple of games, it's important that as I've said, they've got a platform to build on. We'll quickly touch on that penalty decision that wasn't given. I mean, it looked, we were sat quite far away in the press box to the left-hand side, but even looking at the amount of Leeds players that appealed, they're all sort of screaming, running towards the referee, and so it's fair to say Sunderland got away with one there, didn't they?
Yeah, as you say, where our press seats were at Ellen Road, it was really up the other end of the pitch. So I've got to admit, when the incident happened, I didn't know whether it was a penalty or not. The vociferous nature of the Leeds appeals and the fact that literally every Leeds player was going berserk about it did make you think, there might well be something on it. Yeah. When you see it back, it's a clear penalty. I mean, it's one of them. If VAR is in the championship, that is being awarded as the referee's going over to the screen. He's seeing the ball hit Luke O'Nine's hand, and he's given the penalty. There's no doubt about that. But there isn't VAR in the championship, and I still think in real time there's so many bodies in there. There's so much going on in there. It's a hard one for the referee to spot. I do understand why. For all that VAR has been roundly criticised, and there's massive problems with VAR, that actually is really the kind of one that VAR has been brought in for, because it is hard for the referee to spot it in real time. But when you see it back, it's a pretty clear penalty. But listen, as Mike Dodds said after the game, classic managerial cliche, but they're the type of things that over the course of a season you'll get some and you won't get some. And Sunderland did get away with one last night. It would have felt pretty crushing, wouldn't it? If, having done everything that they'd done, they'd conceded a penalty in that manner and lost the game. I think I think that's one where they probably earned their luck.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to, and I said you have to win games differently, but it wasn't a win last night. But you have to they sort of puffed their chest out, didn't they, and showed a different side to that game. There's been times where we've watched them and been like, oh, are they going to concede late on? Well, there was a lot of sort of, I don't know, atmosphere coming, energy coming from the crowd at Ellen Road. It never really felt like Sunderland were in any real danger.
No, there was never a period, was there, where it felt like the kind of Alamo and they were under siege. But I think you just saw at the final whistle, how much it meant to kind of O'Nien and Ballard in particular that they'd been able to do that, and they went and celebrated in front of the fans. And, like you say, yes, it's not a win, but in the context of the season and what Leeds are playing for and what Sunderland have left to play for, it was a pretty creditable display given, for them to kind of dig in and just follow the tactical instructions they'd been given to the letter. A good night for them. It definitely was.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly moving forward, I'm sorry if you can hear me dog barking in the background. He's decided he wants to have a morning.
He's having a yap, is he?
He's decided he wants a morning sing song. But yeah, just moving forward, I mean, obviously it's West Brom up next, and while it's a tough place to go, we'll quickly touch on Sunderland's away form. I mean, it hasn't been great, but again, as I've said, it's a good platform now to sort of finish the season on a strong point. We've spoken multiple times on this podcast about, needing a strong finish heading into what's going to be a massive summer. And it certainly feels like that, especially after that result.
Yeah. I think it was important, certainly in the face of the Blackburn game. I think it was important that Sunderland didn't just allow the wheels to well and truly come off. They had to get back onto some degree of an even keel. And there are players in there that are playing for their future at Sunderland, that are potentially playing with admirers watching them. We know that, so individually players still have things to play for, even if collectively, Sunderland's season to all intents and purposes is over. I mean, West Brom's an interesting one. They play tonight, don't they? We're obviously recording this Wednesday morning live at home to Rotherham. It's famous last words, but you'd pretty much put your mortgage on the winning that, wouldn't you? So, that if they win tonight, they're pretty much there in terms of the playoffs. Probably need one more win, but as we saw from Sunderland last season, and Borough last season, to be fair, what happens in the last couple of weeks of the normal season can have an absolutely massive effect on what happens in the playoff games, whether it be momentum and form, whether it be injuries, whether it be players playing themselves into the team or playing themselves out of the team. So, I don't think there'll be any sense of any kind of slackening up from West Brom, even if they give Rotherham a good hiding tonight. So, like I said earlier, I suspect it'll be a broadly similar game to the Leeds one, where you would imagine West Brom will have the lion's share of the ball, will look to be on the front foot, but will potentially leave gaps for Sunderland to exploit on the break.
I know you've touched on, obviously, Patrick Roberts potentially coming in there. We spoke, didn't we, about maybe the last couple of games, just about potentially seeing Bradley Dack at some point. Do you think Dodds will change much? I mean, I think you're right to suggest that Patrick Roberts is a potential out there on that right-hand side. I mean,
the interesting thing is, obviously, does he stick with the 5 or does he go back to a 4? If he sticks with the 5, then I don't see an awful lot changing. I think at some stage between now and the end of the season, he will want to get a start into a Lacey. Will that be at the weekend? And if it was a 5, would that be as a wing back instead of Styles? I'm not sure. I think if he plays a 5, he'll stick with the same back 5. I could see Roberts coming back in for Chris Rigg, just largely because, are you going to want to play a 16-year-old every game between now and the end of the season? It doesn't feel like something that Dodds would instinctively want to do. So I think at some point, Rigg will probably come back out this weekend, given he's played 2 games in 4 days now, might be the one to do it, in which case you would imagine Roberts will be the logical thing. I think it's going to be Bellingham up front between now and the end of the season. I don't see a scenario where Hamia comes back in, or obviously Burstow's parachuter back in, or Barr up front, as we've seen at points in the season. I think Bellingham up front will be the way that Dodd sticks with now between now and the end of the season. So I don't think there'll be wholesale changes, but clearly the kind of burning selection issue is, does he stick with the 5 or does he go back to a 4?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's difficult to disagree. I mean, he's spoken about sort of looking after the likes of Adji, but he's also spoken about looking after Chris Rigg, like you say. There's for someone who's still 16 years old to be playing and starting at Ellen Road. He started at St Mary's. He started against Leicester.
You just take it for granted now that he's a 16-year-old just kind of slipping in seamlessly into the Championship. Yeah. But when you take a step back, it is really ridiculous that he's at the level he is and playing the football that he is. And you know, as Dodds keeps saying, you need to say the same about Job, really, because he's still a teenager. Dan Neil's barely out of his teenage years. Pembele comes in at 20. You know, I know we keep banging this drum, and you know, there needs to be better balance. There needs to be some experience brought in the summer. We all know that. Surely Speakman and Louis Dreyfus now know that as well. But you know, if you take a step back, the level that these they are kids. These kids are playing at is remarkable, really.
Yeah, I mean, I asked Dodds in his post-match press conference what he made of Chris Rigg, and I think it's fair to say it wasn't his best performance, but it was by no means a poor performance. I mean,
no,
the talent
I think he showed last night that he's mature enough already to be able to do a job. You know, the worry with. I sometimes think the worry with really young players coming into the team is that they overplay, they try and do too much, they make it into trying to prove themselves that they belong there. I think, you know, in some ways, the biggest pat on the back you can give Rigg is that he hasn't made it the Chris Rigg show. He's done the job every game that he's played that he's been asked to do, and that's what he did last night, I thought, really well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot as well tactically to take on board, and for a 16-year-old to actually slot into the side and do that, it's just incredible. It's testament to the player that Sunderland have, like on their books. It's incredible. So, I mean, no doubt conversations should be going on sort of behind the scenes about his future, but it's imperative that they sort of tie him down. To sort of his first professional deal. We'll wrap things up there. So thanks again for joining us this morning. Thanks to those who have subscribed over on our YouTube. You can still do so. Obviously, it's free. As I said at the start of this morning briefing, it's still just £1 to subscribe for 6 months over on We Are Sunderland. There's been some cracking pieces go up on there in the past couple of days. It's a place to be for everything red and white, tactical analysis and exclusive interviews. And if you do subscribe at the moment, we've got a competition to win hospitality tickets for the final day of the season. That competition closes tomorrow, so a final sort of roll call for that. If you haven't yet subscribed, it is worth doing so. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you later on in the week.